That would be very helpful. And after the Chief's remarks, Sergeant Jason Robillard will be available to address any VPD-specific questions.
Good morning, everybody. 2 days from now, on October 17th, the use of recreational cannabis will be legal in Canada. This follows 2 years of consultation and discussion on Bill C-45, the Cannabis Act, and Bill C-46 with regard to impaired driving. One question that has been asked consistently since the legislation was first introduced is, will the police be ready? As president of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, I'm here to tell Canadians that the police are ready. It's important for the public to have a clear understanding of the upcoming changes and what to expect from police services across this country on October 17th. First, it's important to remember that while the legal recreational use of cannabis will be new for Canadians come Wednesday, enforcing laws around impaired driving and the illegal production, distribution, and consumption of cannabis will not be new to police. We've been dealing with drug-impaired driving for many, many decades in Canada. Second, applying the new laws and regulations will involve a concerted approach between various public safety and law enforcement agencies. There are provincial, federal, and municipal laws and regulations that may require action by different public agencies. For example, issues related to public consumption are likely to be addressed by local bylaw officers, similar to how tobacco smoking offenses are administered now, while impaired driving will be addressed by your local or provincial police services, depending on where you live or travel in Canada. It's important that the public be aware that different infractions may involve different agencies and different response times, depending on the risk to public safety. Third, not all issues or concerns related to the legalization of cannabis can or will be resolved on one day or on day one. Police will continue to respond to emergencies and imminent public safety issues, but enforcing the new laws and regulations will be an ongoing process involving a phased approach over weeks, months, and years to come. The police are ready to adapt based on the experience, lessons learned, and the actual reality in each of our communities, which varies across this country. Fourth, please keep in mind that the enforcement of the new cannabis laws is not the only public safety issue for police agencies in Canada. Different areas in the country will have different priorities, and as police leaders, we continuously set priorities with public safety in mind. This will not change with the legalization of cannabis, and there are other pressing public safety issues in our country that we are facing. With regard to drug-impaired driving, as I have outlined, it may take time to work out certain issues related to the new legislation and regulations. I can tell you, though, that police are ready to target drug-impaired drivers. New impaired driving offenses, which have been identified in the new legislation. Bill C-45 legalizes cannabis, which comes into effect on October 17th, but only parts of Bill C-46, which deals with impaired driving, will come into force. Some of the new offenses have been introduced or in Part 2 of the law, and they will come into effect on December the 18th. Police may see an increase in the number of impaired driving by drugs on our roads once cannabis is legalized, but we have well-established techniques to detect impairment that have successfully passed the test of the courts in Canada for many years now. We will continue to rely on the standard field sobriety testing and drug recognition experts to detect and deal with drug-impaired drivers. We're very confident in our present processes, and we will continue to improve with time as we build more capacity. At present, there are more than 13,000 police officers trained in Canada in standard field sobriety testing, and we are expecting this number to rise to 20,000 within the next several years. In addition, there are approximately 833 drug recognition experts throughout Canada. The RCMP, provincial partners, and local police have a goal of training a minimum of 500 additional certified drug recognition experts over the next 5 years. The numbers are increasing and will continue to grow as time goes on. As for roadside drug screening devices, the CACP has continuously stated that such testers remain an additional tool for police officers and are only one piece of the overall solution. To date, only one model has been approved for use by the federal government. This represents the first of what we anticipate will be additional options to come. The CACP encourages further research and development of screening devices capable of quantifying THC levels. However, each individual police service in Canada will evaluate and determine the potential use of drug screening devices to meet the needs of their police agency and the communities they serve. With regard to workplace policies, the same applies. Regarding cannabis consumption by officers off-duty, a one-size-fits-all approach will not meet the needs of all police services in Canada. Like other workplace policies, decisions need to be made by individual police services. The evidence is simply not there for the CACP to endorse one specific approach over another. As a result, some police services are taking a zero-tolerance approach. Others are opting for established timeframes between consumption and active duty. And finally, others are using fit-for-duty policies that state that employees shall not be under the influence while showing up for work and must remain fit for duty during the course of their duties. Police leaders are making decisions with the goal to ensure the health and safety in their workplace as well as in their communities. Keep in mind that the workplace policies adopted today are not cast in stone. They may change in time as our experience develops. Moving forward, there are two areas where we continue to encourage government to build on the work that has already been done. The first relates to organized crime, and the second to consumption by youth. We know that organized crime will attempt to capitalize on the legalization of cannabis. On this front, the CACP supports any initiatives that dissuades Canadians from turning to the black market to obtain cannabis. We're doing everything we can to stop organized crime from becoming involved in both the medical and recreational marijuana industries. We're also counting on clear packaging and labeling that details penalties for illegal production and trafficking of cannabis. The CACP supports all efforts to deter and reduce criminal activity by imposing appropriate penalties for those breaking the law, especially those who import or export cannabis or provide cannabis to our youth. The CACP believes that strong and sustained messaging and education campaigns, particularly for youth, are essential to raise awareness of the dangers to youth of consuming and distributing cannabis. There is no doubt that Canadians are headed into uncharted waters with the legalization of cannabis in 2 days. There is no exception for those responsible for public safety. However, we have and will continue to enhance the preparedness of Canada's police officers. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Laura Kane with Canadian Press. I have a two-part question.
Sure.
I'm wondering, what is police role in policing unlicensed grow-ops and retail stores? What have you heard from your colleagues across the country on how swiftly they plan to crack down on unlicensed grow-ops and retail stores?
Well, grow-ops, if you're talking about people having grow-ops like in their houses or illegal grow-ops, those have always been illegal and will continue to be illegal. And police will enforce the laws on those the way they've always had. So that will be no change. As far as cannabis dispensaries or stores that you're referring to, that's going to be an interesting one that will vary across the country. You know that certain jurisdictions, such as here in Vancouver, we do have a high percentage of cannabis stores compared to other places in the country. So now the law will actually become clear and will be able to assist us in that regard, working with the city, working with the province. The province is going to take the lead on it because they have, for example, in this province, new community safety units that will be tasked with that responsibility, but we will be working with them and assisting them as necessary.
Have you heard anything from colleagues across the country on how quickly they'll crack down? Will it be day one, you're cracking down on unlicensed retail stores, or are you giving some time, given that these stores may have applied for licenses and are just waiting to see?
Mm-hmm. I find it highly unlikely that anybody's going to be doing any kind of a big crackdown on day one. And one thing I've said before is that October 17th is going to come, and then October 18th, and then October 19th, and you're probably not going to see a whole big change with regard to what the police are doing or what anybody else is doing. This is going to be an approach that's going to be measured, take time till the new, the laws will come into effect, but till everybody gets used to it and the new stores get their licenses. Some provinces have more up and running right away, others don't. But I think they're taking a pretty common sense, pragmatic, and measured approach to get the new stores online.
It's my understanding that most provinces will have a provincial unit cracking down on unlicensed retailers and producers. What guidance have you given your colleagues in terms of where police fit in terms of enforcement? are police expected to gather intelligence to help these units? What type of guidance have you gotten from the provinces?
Well, it depends what type of enforcement you're talking about. So if you're talking about higher level things like, the production, the importation, exportation of, illegal drugs in and out of Canada, that would clearly be the police and CBSA, agencies like that. If you're talking about enforcement at the lowest level, like somebody smoking, and in many provinces, and this does vary between provinces, but in very many provinces, you will be able to smoke cannabis in a similar situation to where you can now smoke tobacco. So infractions like that probably aren't going to fall to the police, just like they don't now. If somebody's smoking, illegally, like in a park or a school ground, that would be usually bylaw officers. We'll probably get complaints on it, but that would not be something the police would normally deal with if it was tobacco. So that would be a mixed model of who might respond to that. As far as things kind of in the middle, like the marijuana stores, that will probably be a bit of a hybrid depending. The main focus of that, though, will be the province will have responsibility, but they will be working with police and city officials as well. So every situation is quite different, and we've got to kind of, feel out the landscape as we go forward, because it's not a black and white thing that police are just doing this, the community safety units are doing this, bylaw officers are doing that. We have to all get used to how this new regime is going to look.
In terms of the pot shops, do you think that your role as departments will be more to enforce provincial orders, like raids, as opposed to gathering intelligence to get to that point of seizure?
Well, we have a great relationship with the province and with the city, and we'll be working closely with them. And there's no big raids or anything planned right now. I think it's going to be a process where, just what I see myself in the media like you do, I think a lot of the stores that are operating illegally right now are actually planning to scale back because they don't want to jeopardize themselves from getting a legal provincial license, and that could put them in jeopardy if they continue to operate.
You talk about enforcement priorities. I'm wondering, will anything change at all when it comes to drug dealers? Like not organized, not large-scale organized crime, but small-time drug dealers.
Well, one of the key things I'll tell you on that is going to be price point. So if the prices are set too high, it opens the door for organized crime to come in. So the prices that the government retailers and these stores are going to be selling the pot for has got to be competitively priced, because otherwise organized crime will come in and undercut them. So that is a concern for us, for sure.
So it sounds like there's going to be a grace period around the retail shops, which is understandable. How long till we start seeing a lot more of the 90-day driving bans and you really crack the hammer, crack the whip on that?
Well, as far as impaired driving goes, impaired driving in this country has actually been coming down in recent years. So last year, I think we had about 69,000 plus impaired driving cases across the entire country. Just 5 years ago, that was about 77,000 cases. So the numbers have actually come down over time. It has gone up slightly for impaired driving by drugs during that time, but impaired driving by alcohol has come down. We have been dealing with impaired driving by drugs for many, many years, so our officers are well equipped to deal with that, and we'll still deal with it like we do every day. We'll be out on patrol, we'll be checking, if vehicles are swerving down the street, or if we have regular, as we call them, counterattack in British Columbia, or ride programs in Ontario, where officers do, blitzes at Christmas or in the summertime, those kinds of things. Those activities will continue, and we'll enforce the law. If we find people impaired by drugs and or alcohol, then we'll deal with it either with roadside suspensions or criminal charges.
You said that the 17th will be no different than the 18th or 16th. You've been dealing with the illicit cannabis sector right in front of your face for years. Have you counseled colleagues in any way as to kind of what to expect, or perhaps calm them down if they're alarmed at what could happen on day one?
No, that's a good question, because everywhere in Canada is different. So we're talking about here a vast country with rural areas, 3 different oceans, prairies, maritimes, big cities like Toronto and Vancouver and Ottawa, and then some very small rural and suburban areas. So everywhere is going to be slightly different. People are always interested in the Vancouver experience, and Victoria similarly as well, our experience with pot stores. We do have some things happening in this province that are a little bit different in other places in the country, so people are definitely interested in our experience. And yes, I have talked to colleagues across the country about those issues.
Chief Palmer, I don't know if you know, but sometimes we smoke pot in the city of Vancouver. So it's not a city, you've heard, it's not a city known for no tolerance. Will it be harder or easier for a pot smoker to smoke in 2 days?
Well, I think it'll be easier because it will be legal just like tobacco. It's actually going to be like in this province, it will actually be more similar to tobacco than alcohol, because you can't walk down the street and drink a bottle of beer, but you will be able to walk down the street and smoke marijuana in this province. And some provinces are like that. Others are more strict on public consumption, so it varies. But it's going to be very similar to tobacco.
Even if it's most likely that it would not have been bought in Kamloops, so probably illegally?
Right, but for an average person, you know, it's like what I would sort of liken it to is if somebody's walking down the street smoking a cigarette, the police aren't coming up and checking them and seeing if that tobacco was purchased, you know, at the 7-Eleven or they purchased it illegally from a tobacco trafficker. So, you know, we will apply common sense.
This has been a time frame. You guys have been given some time to deal with this, but it's also been relatively tight. So what's been the toughest part in this process when you're dealing with so many processes, so many provinces, and so many moving pieces?
Well, we have had a couple of years to deal with it. I mean, we knew that it was an election promise in the 2015 federal election, so we've really had 3 years to sort of see this progress, and we've had a couple of years as the legislation was taking shape. So we have had a long time to look at it. There's many subcommittees of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, including the Law Amendments Committee, Traffic Committee, Drug Advisory Committee, HR Committee, Law Amendments Committee, many different committees that are comprised of senior police officers from across the country. And we look at these issues when new laws are emerging in our country, and we come up with strategies and opinions on how to face these new laws. So we don't make the laws, but we have to work within that framework. We do provide suggestions to government when they're in the point of crafting laws. And then once the laws come, then we have to come up with, you know, sort of standard operating procedures to deal with them. So in this case, there's a whole host of issues. There's the HR side, which is probably a bit unusual compared to other changes in law in the country. So that would probably be a unique piece. And then it's not just police, though. I think all Canadians have to really, you know, wrap their head around the fact that come Wednesday, the laws, it's going to be a significant wholesale change to laws in our country.
Chief, is there any concern that, given that you said that there's going to be kind of different approaches across Canada, that there's going to be confusion for Canadians about enforcement? And that if they go from one city to the other, if they move, if they visit, is there concern about confusion if it's going to be different across the country?
Right, so the federal laws will be the same anywhere you go in Canada, but there will be nuances in different cities, in different provinces for sure, depending on what the laws are provincially, the provincial regulations that have been set up. So there could be slight differences. So it may be legal to smoke, you know, let's say in a parking lot in Vancouver, but you may go to another province and it's not legal there. But you have to remember though, for things like that, people aren't going to get arrested. Like, chances are it would probably be a warning, or if not a warning, maybe a ticketed offense, but nobody's going to jail for something like that.
Can you just sort of clear out the direction you've gotten from the province with regard to the 50 or 60 odd unlicensed pot shops in your city? So on day one, will they be able to keep the product if they've applied to the province and the city for a license? Will they be able to keep selling illicit product until they get licensed?
Well, no, that will be illegal. They won't be able to do that because the product will have to come from a licensed government supplier. So, you know, I just saw in the local papers today that some of them are having sort of fire sales, selling off all these things to try and get rid of their stock so that they can hopefully obtain legal stock coming in the door. So that will be illegal. As far as, you know, the clamping down, it's like anything in government. There's limited resources. They form these teams, but, you know, they have to prioritize on their own schedules and how they're going to tackle this issue because there are a number of stores they have to look at.
Have you met with the unit yet, or the head of the unit?
I've spoken with one of the people that is in charge from the province, and our drug folks have spoken with people that are more closer down to the front lines on it. So yeah, we're in communications.
And have you shared intelligence on some of the operators you think are the shadiest, perhaps, like since the organized crime?
I haven't personally, but it would be natural that there would be conversations. You know, if we do have concerns about organized crime figures, then for sure, then we would have those discussions. Yeah.
Some markets are, especially in Vancouver here, are really accustomed to having access to these dispensaries. You know, we have a lot of cannabis users in the city in particular, but in other cities as well, that are accustomed to being able to walk down the street and pick up cannabis. You know, you mentioned, you know, any kind of measure to help stem organized crime. With no cannabis brick and mortar stores opening up in the city of Vancouver on October 17th, is there a concern that where all these dispensaries are closed, that could create an opportunity for organized crime? And if so, would that at all influence how the VPD is going to, or other police forces, enforce leading up to those types of stores beginning to open?
I'll tell you why I don't think it's a big concern. So if I always try to look at things in practical terms in our country and when we're dealing with policing issues. The last numbers I saw from Statistics Canada are that about 15% of Canadians, which is about 4.6 million people, so there's about 4.6 million Canadians that say they've smoked pot within the last 3 months. So millions and millions of Canadians are all smoking pot. Almost all of them have got it, unless they're medicinal marijuana users who've got it from a government source. Almost all of those people have got it from illicit sources. So with millions of Canadians using an illicit drug supply for decades and decades in our country, when the law changes on the 17th, that's what I'm saying, you're not going to see a big change overnight. It's going to be an iterative process where we're going to have to go from that model to a license model where the government is supplying the pot and these stores will start to open up, and then we'll change that balance where it's not coming from the illicit supply, it'll come from a legitimate supply. But that's going to take some time. And the police are not sitting back in the wings like chomping at the bit to all of a sudden go out and start raiding stores. We're going to take a practical approach to it, let it play out so we can move into a civilized, legalized regime.
Are you also going to take that approach with illegal grow-ops? Because there are some in the province who would like to be legal, but their micro-cultivator license hasn't come through yet from the federal government. So is it fair to crack down on them, and do you also plan to take a more pragmatic approach with the grow-ops?
Well, with grow-ops, I'll tell you that most of the ones that I've seen in my career, I know what you're talking about, like, sort of the boutique ones and that kind of thing. Most of the focus that we've had in policing has always been on ones connected to organized crime, to the bikers and groups like that that are known to do these types of things. So that would continue to be our focus.
Just following up with enforcement, in terms of the illegal shops, chiefs like yourself who have a bunch of these illegal shops in their cities,
right,
will legalization take a big weight off your shoulders? And if so, how do you think it'll affect the bottom line in terms of policing?
I don't think it really takes a big weight off my shoulders, but I think it's actually good that we've got some clear direction now from the federal government. Like, we know going forward now what the federal laws will be, what the provincial laws will be, how the city is going to interface with that, because municipalities as well will create different bylaws and approaches to licensing stores. So if you're talking about in this city in particular, we're going to wait to see how all those three things gel and how we fit into the picture. But I think it'll be clear lines as opposed to this sort of gray area that we've been operating in for a number of years in Vancouver. But as far as weight off the shoulder, I would say in the scheme of things we're dealing with, like, yeah, the marijuana is important, but it is not the most important thing going on in the country right now. There's, fentanyl, for example, kills 11 Canadians a day, and marijuana certainly doesn't. So there are more pressing issues going on in public safety.
What about local social programs who are distributing weed to drug addicts to reduce their consumption of opioids? Are they going to be allowed to resume their operations?
Well, it's all going to make, people have to do it legally. So if there's a legal framework that they're going through, Vancouver Coastal Health or through legal sources, that sort of thing, then, have at it. But people have to do things legally in this country.
Chief, can you take some questions on the phone now?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Priya, do you have any questions on the phone?
If you would like to ask a question, please press star then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. We'll pause for just a moment.
Is there anybody there?
You do have one. There is one person. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Please state your first and last name and your media outlet.
Hey, it's Alicia Hasham from the Toronto Star. The question is, how are police officers handling the cultural and personal perspective change that comes with previously illegal substance becoming legal for recreational use?
Okay, no, I understand your question. I guess I just want to frame it. Are you talking about, like, within the police culture itself, the potential use of marijuana, or how they may perceive the public using it?
No, how police officers sort of will view the public using it. Well, kind of both. Like, how they view the public using it, and also how will they view it sort of among themselves. Maybe it's a two-part question.
Right. Okay. I mean, I would just say in general, like, a McLean study I saw recently, I think it was a 2017 study, but I was looking at it recently. I believe it, cannabis acceptance rates in this country are very high, and support for legalization is around 68%. So that's over 2/3 of the country support legalization. In some provinces, such as British Columbia and Ontario, I believe those rates are even higher. And police officers are a subset of the population. So you will have some police officers, I'm sure, just like you do in the general public, that will be opposed to legalization. You'll have a lot of police officers, just like the general public, that are fine with it. So, everybody's going to have their own take on it, but the fact that they are police officers, when they come to work and they're doing their job, they have to understand what the new laws of the country will be, and we've gone to extensive steps to make sure that they're trained. We've worked with the Canadian Police Knowledge Network to provide them training online with detailed online training about how the federal regulations and provincial regulations are going to play out. We've also done in-house training at many of our agencies, including my agency. So officers, when they hit the streets on Wednesday, will have a clear understanding of the laws. And it's like anything with law enforcement. People may have personal views, but they know what the laws are to enforce in Canada.
Again, please press star 1 if you have a question on the phone. There are no further questions at this time.
Okay.
Just going back to the social programs, the OPS, the High Hopes program was shut down 2 weeks ago. So they will have to get a license just like anybody else?
I'm not going to speak about something very specific just to Vancouver because it is supposed to be a national issue that we're talking about here, but I'll just say that if people are going to be supplying marijuana, they have to do it through legal sources.
Do you have an idea in BC how many forces will use or not use the drag or drug test?
I don't have an exact number, but I'll tell you it's going to be a bit of a mix, as it will be across the country. There's some agencies that have decided not to use it, and they're going to wait for the next approved device to come out, and there are other agencies that will be using it. So again, we don't have alignment across the country amongst agencies on what their positions are. People will have to do what they think is right for their particular jurisdiction and their department.
I was under the impression that no departments would roll out the widespread use of the device this week and this month even. Is that true?
You're talking about all across Canada? I know a lot of them, I can't speak for, because there's over 140 police agencies in Canada, so I can't tell you, you could get me to answer that and you'll find one in some obscure place. But I know that there's a lot of the major police agencies across the country and a lot of the big cities have come out and said that they won't be using the Draeger 5000. But I also know that there are other smaller communities that will be using it, so it will be a mix.
Sorry, the use is not just a pilot testing, that's actually the force will be using it.
It's an approved device, so that means it's been approved by the federal government, so it could go into use right away. We went through pilot testing about a year ago. Vancouver was one of the test sites, as were other cities, where we tested 2 or 3 different devices at the time. It didn't result in any charges. It was a voluntary thing that we dealt with people with the public, and we tested a number of different devices with Public Safety Canada. This was the one device that was ultimately approved by the government, but it doesn't fit the needs for every agency, but clearly it does for some. So that's why you're going to see a mixed approach across the country.
I know you said that you're going to have a really common sense approach. Obviously, there's going to be a bit of a grace period, but I guess what should people know about variations that can happen between communities? I mean, Vancouver's been quite lenient, but we're seeing even other communities in Metro Vancouver that don't want to have any marijuana retail whatsoever. So what should people know before they buy or consume in public, just as a regular person?
Well, in British Columbia, if you're talking about like different communities around here, it will be the same everywhere in BC. So that's not going to change as far as what the laws are, like possession and when you can smoke it, that kind of thing. The issue will be the retail outlets will be the most serious one to watch because that will vary from community to community. I know some communities don't want them at all. There's other communities that will embrace them. So that's why it's sort of wait and see in some of these places because every place will be different.
Comment on whether organized crime has been adapting over the last couple of years, their products, how they're making money in anticipation of this change in law?
Well, organized crime is heavily involved right now in the whole drug market, including marijuana. The supply that we see across the country right now that has been, as I mentioned, supplying 4.6 million Canadians is a major enterprise worth billions and billions of dollars every year to multiple organized crime groups across this country. So they will always look for loopholes or ways to try and fit in using nominees or proxy applications for different things and try and get the way in the door. So that's the sort of thing that we'll be watching. We're hoping that with the new laws and regulations that it will be able to eliminate them significantly. Indications are that it is going to make a big difference, but they're quite crafty, so we'll see what they come up with. But we'll be watching it closely.
Are they shifting to new products in anticipation of losing the share of the market, if you will?
Well, they're already involved in all the different drugs, whether it's cannabis, methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, fentanyl. They're involved in all of the supply of all those drugs. So,
Chief, a lot of the DUI attorneys I spoke to in Washington said they're very doubtful of the standard field sobriety test and that it didn't work and it couldn't be applied to drugs like marijuana as opposed to alcohol. Are you 100% confident in the standard field sobriety test, or is it more of a case that you don't really have another option at the moment?
Well, you have to remember, like, you're referring to lawyers have said in another country. In this country, in Canada, standard field sobriety tests and drug recognition experts have stood up to court tests, and there's been no problem. So we're in good standing in Canada.
Chief, have you heard of any police officers interested in cracking down on people selling edibles online or in stores, given that edibles won't be legal for another year?
Yeah, edibles won't be legal. That is a concern for police, absolutely. There have been cases that not you specifically, but you as the media have reported on, where we've seen edibles that are shaped like gummy bears and all kinds of things, and kids will consume them thinking that they're candy. So those are definitely public safety concerns, and those won't be legal, and those would be things that we would enforce.
I just wanted to clarify your earlier comments when you said it was highly unlikely that raids would be conducted on day one. Were you speaking sort of countrywide or just in the province of BC?
Well, I can never speak 100% for every single police chief across the country, but I do have relationships with most of them. And I can tell you, I'm not aware of anybody planning any big raids on the day, and you're certainly not going to see it around here, and I'm not aware of that happening anywhere in the country. So anything could happen, anything's possible in this world. I never like to say always or never, but I'd say it's highly unlikely. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's it, guys. Do you have any questions unrelated to the CACP, specifically to